So now we're up at the top of the hill. We previously did the flat, now we're going to do the top, see how it goes. Now, as we look around, we can see that we've got a different aspect here. Being at the top of the hill, it is more exposed, more windy, also gets a bit more sunlight, north sunlight, west sunlight, afternoon, so it may go brown a little earlier than down in the valley where it's more sheltered, just because it's getting warmer weather. However, at the beginning of spring, coming out of winter, it may green up faster and grow faster because it's getting that extra afternoon warmth. So that's just something to bear in mind with aspect. It's not always about the soil, even though the soil is so important. So I'm going to try digging a hole here. It's definitely a little bit drier. So the topsoil is similar, that grey-brown crumbly soil. Because it's drier, it's falling out of the auger, so I'll just dig it out. We saw when we walked into the paddock that this soil has got some quite distinct cracking running through it. And being a clayish soil, it probably absorbs a lot of water and swells up, and then as it dries out, it forms a network of cracks along the ground. It can be quite challenging for house foundations, for example, or for keeping fence posts in place, because the soil moves with the season. Another thing we know about this part of the Fleurieu and these clay soils is that some of these steeper areas are prone to slips, landslides. So as the soil on top gets saturated, it becomes very soft, and if it's got something underneath that's slippery like hard rock, then that soft saturated soil can slip downhill, causing landslides. And there's not really a lot you can do about that apart from don't disturb the soil by ploughing or ripping, and holding it in place as much as possible using perennial vegetation, deep-rooted trees and so on. It's maintaining its crumbliness deeper into the soil in this hole. That's partly due to the moisture content, because it was more moist down in the creek flat, but it may also be a lighter type of clay up on the top of the ridge. It's starting to come out a little bit more chunky now. Starting to hold together a bit more. A little bit more moisture as we go down. There's still roots coming out. And as you can see, the grass around here is still green, so they're doing a great job of getting moisture out from deep in the profile. That's the importance of having soil that's got good structure deep into the profile. It gives your plants a much deeper reserve of water to draw on when things start to dry out. So here it's starting to get a bit tougher. Okay, so this is pretty tough soil here. I was only able to get down to 30 centimetres. There are still roots growing very happily down there. There was an earthworm in there as well. So the plant roots and the soil biology managing it. But if I wanted to get deeper in this soil, I'd need either heavy machinery or more moisture in the soil. So looking at the colour, it's pretty even most of the way down. We've got sort of medium crumbliness here, moderate through here. Then down here where it's a little bit more moist, you can see that it's breaking into these quite hard, larger, more massive structural beds. But given the amount of cracks and the crumbliness of it, this is quite a decent structure, and when it rains the water will just run in and fill up that soil. We're not seeing much evidence of mottling here. Lots of roots through it, as I said, so as the water goes in it's penetrating quite well, and the only thing that will really stop it is if this clay swells up and seals, which it might do if it was waterlogged. So we'll check the texture. Is it a heavier clay than down the bottom, or is it the same, or is it lighter? So water goes straight in. That nice dark colour, and it's holding its crumbs quite well in this, even though I'm squishing it and mushing it. You wouldn't want to get on this soil when it was wet though. You would probably sink the vehicle tyres right down. So as I'm feeling this, I can feel that there's not much sand in it. It's very smooth to the touch. It's slightly lighter in feel. It's not as difficult to move as the stuff down on the flat. And it feels to me as if it has a little bit more sort of siltiness in it. Silt is like super fine sand, and it gives a very slippery feel to soil. So this is really absorbing water. So this is, you can tell why it's a shrink swirl clay. As it absorbs water, it opens up and then absorbs even more water. So I would probably call this a silty clay. Certainly forms a ball quite nicely. Forms a ribbon very easily, and when it's ribboned out, it forms a ribbon, but it is breaking slightly shorter. So at this stage I would call that a silty light clay, so slightly lighter than down the bottom, which means that it will hold slightly less water, but it will give it up to plants more easily. So it's actually quite a nice soil type. So this is the soil from down the bottom, which is to say 30 centimetres down. Definitely very clayey, very slippery, very hard. It's taking a little bit of effort to move this soil around. And it's also taking longer to absorb the water. Definitely very slippery stuff, this. You can, when you feel it, you can understand why things slide off it. Very slippery indeed. And it's taking quite a lot of effort to move it. So it forms a ball quite happily. It'll form a log very happily if I can get it to move. And when ribboned, although it's still fairly clumpy, it's holding together reasonably well. So I would say that would be a medium heavy clay, possibly going down to a heavier clay underneath. So that one goes there. We'll have a look at what happens to this clay when it gets water on it. So this is the slaking and dispersion test. So we've got our saucer, or possibly glass jar, with water in it. We take a crumb from the surface, if we can find a nice crumb. Okay, that one will do. I'll take one from a little lower down. So that's the second layer. Take one from about 25 and one from right down the bottom. That thick black clay. So here we have the different crumbs in some plain clean rainwater. You can also use distilled water, just not tap water or bore water, because they can have salts in them. So that's the top there. That's about 15 centimetres, 25 and 35. And these crumbs are holding together very strongly. There's almost no movement in the top one. We're not seeing anything milky around them at all. They're just sitting there. The occasional little crumb has fallen off. But overall, they're holding together very well. So this is a soil with good structure and quite stable, which is excellent. We'll also test the pH that we've got here. So again, from the topsoil there, the subsoil. The subsoil is actually the most likely to be acid out of all the layers, because at the surface, although it's biologically active, you get a lot of organic matter, and organic matter tends to neutralise acidity, whereas just underneath it we don't have that neutralising, and it's also a very active root zone. And then down underneath. So pH solution. And that's looking very similar all the way down. So if we compare it against the colour chart, the top definitely 7 to 6.5. Same with the subsoil just underneath it. As we go down, 7. Yep, that's 7 to 6.5 as well. So it's very even in pH all the way down here, and in a good neutral to slightly acid range, which is perfect for these kinds of plants. No problems with acidity, not too alkaline either, just right. So having had a look at the soil in here, in this area, so soil at the top of the ridge and also the soil down near the river flat, very similar, quite clayey, moderate clay to heavy clay soils with good structures, which is allowing the water to come in, penetrate that soil and wet it up, so we're getting this excellent pasture growth. Mildly acid to neutral pH, which is no limitation on plant growth. What we have seen as we walk along the dry surface is that it tends to crack very widely, and we know from talking to the landowner and from the records around here that the soil may be prone to slips, so that is something that people farming in this area would want to take care about. Apart from that, for growing plants, a lovely soil, and we'll take some samples away and analyse them and see what nutrient content it has. If you'd like to know more about the soils in your area, please contact your local landscape board office and we can point you towards somebody who can talk to you about your soils and your landscape.